I would like to take the opportunity to introduce a very close friend of mine whose parents, well, I don't want to tell her story, she will tell. This is Minnie Frohlinger, and she teaches in the preschool here at AIS. She may be a familiar face to you. And she has
I don't think I had any of you in preschool.
No, not that far back. And she's going to tell her story, well, her parents' story.
Right. If it's a little difficult at times, please, everybody bear with me, please understand, and I'll try my best to get through this. On September 1st, 1939, the Nazis marched into Poland. My mother, Bella, a 12-year-old girl, lived in the city of Lublin with her parents and two younger brothers. Shortly after, this 12-year-old girl was torn away from her parents and brothers, who were massacred by the Nazis, and she began a lonely trek from one concentration camp to another over the course of the next 5.5 years. She endured the subhuman conditions of some of the worst camps: Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Plaszow, and Theresienstadt, and many, many other concentration camps. All her life, she carried a number: 18009, 18,009, that was tattooed on her arm, and the digits add up to 18. And if any of you know Hebrew, it adds up to Chai, which means life. This gave her hope to continue her lonely path in life. She told of occasions when selections were made, not knowing which group was worse, which was better to be in, who would live, who would die. On at least one occasion, she instinctively switched herself from one group to another to be with a friend that she just made. Her former group was exterminated while she and her group lived. She pretended that she was older in order to stay alive and to be able to work. In 1944, she was transferred to the Plaszow labor camp near Krakow. She was in a selection and worked as a housekeeper for a sadistic commandant, Amon Gov, who many of you know maybe from Schindler's List if you've seen the movie. He would stand on the balcony and shoot prisoners who were working too slowly. My mom's hours were from very early in the morning to late at night. Once or twice while this commandant was sleeping, she took a sharp instrument, put holes in the pastrami, in the bread, in the cheeses, anything she could possibly get her hands on. And when the commandant woke up, he barked at her and says, "What happened to this food?" And she said, "Maybe you have a mouse in the pantry." When God told her to go get other food, she realized her plan worked. She packed the food and brought it back to the camp to share with everyone that she was sleeping with, to all the starting inmates. As the war came to a close, she was transferred to Theresienstadt, where she was liberated by the Russian army. She met my dad at liberation, and even though they took a liking to each other, it wasn't the time to start a relationship. The main goal of everyone after the war was to go back to their hometowns to see if any loved ones had survived. That was the meeting place, their hometown. She went back to her hometown. She found that no one from her family had survived. And keep in mind, she went to the war at 12 years old, and now she was just about 18. And again, left all alone and had to start her life all over again. My dad, David Grabin, was the youngest of 7 children and grew up in a very small, warm community in Śleszyń, a rural town in western Poland near the German border. He had just turned 19 when the war broke out in his hometown. At the end of July 1940, my dad recalled vividly the pounding on the door, "Juden raus," Jews out. My dad, his parents, siblings were given only minutes to grab some belongings and to go to the marketplace in the center of town. They had to leave everything behind. My dad managed to keep some family photographs in his pocket, which miraculously he was able to hold on to during the entire war. These pictures were links to his home, a home that he never saw again. I remember him telling me how the marketplace was a scene of panic, fear, screaming. People were getting beaten to death. They were being crammed into cattle cars and sent away. The Germans demanded that everyone give up their valuables. Those who didn't were beaten. My dad's uncle was a poor man. He had nothing to give up. The guards, the Nazis, didn't believe him, and they beat him to death in the center of the marketplace with the entire family watching. My dad was shuffled around from one labor camp to another. He was in 17 different camps. The conditions were that of hunger, cold, and disease. In January 1941, he agonizingly parted from his parents and 2 brothers. He was sent to one camp, his parents and brothers to another. To his sorrow, my dad never got to say goodbye to those members of his families who went to their deaths in Frohlinger. In 1943, the people were down to their last reserves of strength, tired, hungry, weighing half of their normal weight. In the Lithuanian work camp, the drunken guards decided to eliminate those who were too weak to work. They woke them up, selected them, and shot them on the spot. My dad remembers the guard waking him up. He was selected to be eliminated. And one of the other guards stopped him and said, "No, this is David. David's a good worker. David's a hard worker." My dad's life was spared. The remaining workers had to bury the bodies of their friends. My dad's life was spared this time and on several other occasions. Towards the end of 1944, my dad was relocated to the infamous Buchenwald concentration camp as a laborer. The war was nearing the end, and the Allies had already begun bombing the camps. After every bombing, the laborers were ordered to clean up. The guards would get violently angry and intensify the beatings and whippings of the Jews. They blamed the bombings on the Jews. As the air raid became more frequent, the camps began evacuating. In April 1945, my dad was nothing but skin and bones. He was suffering from malnutrition, weakness, and he was put in a hospital. A childhood friend heard that those in the hospital would be killed the following day since the camp was being evacuated. His friend got him out of bed and snuck him out of the hospital. My dad's life was saved once again. The evacuation took a long time, and since the Allies were bombing constantly, they could not use the trains or wagons. They had to walk to the next camp, to Czechoslovakia, to Theresienstadt. 2 weeks later, on May 10, 1945, the Theresienstadt concentration camp was liberated by the Russians. Ironically, this is the day, May 10th, the date that the camp was scheduled to be exterminated by the Nazis. As I mentioned previously, my parents met after their liberation in Theresienstadt, and both went their separate ways, thinking they'd never see each other again. What was most important was seeing if any family members survived and everybody went back to their hometowns. My father was from Western Poland and my mother from Eastern Poland. My dad returned to his hometown and found his oldest brother had survived. Unfortunately, his brother's wife and 3 children were killed. And my brother, remember, I mentioned he was one of 7. So it was only my father's oldest brother, and my father was the youngest of 7. He and his brother left Poland to go to Germany to work. At that time, my mom was working in Landsberg, Germany, in a camp for displaced persons that housed Jewish survivors, which served as a rehabilitation center. One afternoon, a sudden impulse compelled my mom just to leave work early, for no reason at all. It was just a feeling that she had. While my dad and his brother were walking looking for employment, my dad saw my mom crossing the street, someone he thought he'd never see again. After a short courtship, they were married in Landsberg in 1946. My parents were destined to survive, and later their close partnership enabled them to have happier times. My brother was born in Germany a couple years after they were married, and they arrived in America. I was born in America. I remember vividly the nightmares that my parents had, but this did not have an impact on their family life, which was warm, loving, and so caring. My mother would make us Jell-O 10 times a day because she didn't know what else to do for us. She was so happy to have family. My parents were so happy to have family, which they had missed for so long. My brother and I were everything to them. My parents spent the rest of their lives trying to make everyone aware of the Holocaust, and a tremendous appreciation by their children and their 10 grandchildren of the special gift of life that they were given as soul survivors. I did it, everybody.
begin to relate to you their stories?
Okay. It's funny that you asked that. It's a good, very good question, because I have friends also who grew up as children as Holocaust survivors, and most of my friends, parents didn't want to talk about it, and understandably, it's a very, very hard subject to talk about, and they just couldn't talk about it. And my parents, when we would ask them questions, I remember at the Friday night Shabbat table, we would ask, my brother and I would ask questions, and it was so hard for my parents to answer us, but they did, because they knew we would have to know, and they wanted our children and future generations to know. And it was very painful. They cried when they shared their stories with us, but they did. And I remember, you know, they did it gradually, not when we were very little, of course, but as we got older and would understand more, they shared with us. And I think there's, of course, everybody has questions that they, you know, say, I wish I knew this or that, and unfortunately my parents passed away already. But I think I know so much. And not only do I know, my children know. And when I share these stories with my children or all of you, the memory of these people will live on, and no one will forget. And that was the purpose my parents had in sharing it with us, because we wanted the world to remember. We don't want anybody to ever forget what a horrible thing happened to them and to 6 million other people. Yes? I don't know the entire story, maybe, but I feel I know so much of what they went through. I really do. I mean, unfortunately, when Schindler's List came out, my mother had already passed away, and I knew the story about Amon Goff and how he treated the people who worked for him. And it was very difficult for me to see that movie, because I could just imagine how my mother feared for her life every second of the day, and how brave she was living in that house.
Is there any particular reason your mother got transferred to all the years?
They were just in selections, and I don't think any particular reason. It was just like, unfortunately, some were selected to be killed, some were selected to be, it was, I guess, the hand of God. I don't know, you know, how it was planned. It was just, I do know that she did say that she was older than she actually was. If you remember at the beginning, I said that she was 12 years old, and the Nazis were not interested in dealing with little kids, and therefore she said she was 14 or 15. In order to survive, she could see around her the kids were getting killed everywhere around her, and she said that she was older, she was more mature looking, and that was one of the things, I guess, that saved her life too.
You had mentioned that your father was able to hold on to a few photographs, and when they returned back to their respective towns, were they able to salvage it?
I have them here, actually. What happened is, unfortunately, the pictures that he had, he has a couple pictures of his brothers, a lot of his friends. Unfortunately, I don't even have a picture of what my grandparents look like from my mother's side or my father's side. And that's hard for me, because do my children look, do I look like my grandparents or any of the uncles or aunts in my family? And the pictures that he was managed when they were knocking at the doors, Jews out, he just grabbed those pictures, and he just needed something to take with him. And the way he managed to keep these pictures, when he was transferred to camp, they had to give up everything. And he would sort of like see which Nazi seemed like maybe a little bit easier. I wouldn't say kind, but a little bit easier than the other. And he would hand it over to the Nazi and he said, "This is all I have. Will you just hold on to it?" And they gave it back to him every single time when he was leaving the camp. And that's why he was able to, you know, hold on to the pictures. And it's amazing that he was able to do that. I don't know if anybody has time to see, but these are the pictures that my father. Oops. Here, you're welcome to look at them if any of you want. And he's got like just lots of pictures of friends and a couple of brothers, and it was just, I don't know if you weren't too short. You got it. And that was like sheer luck that he was able to hold on to these pictures. And every Nazi ended up giving it back to him when he was being transferred to another camp. Any questions? Don't be shy. Yeah.
Will you
your mother and father came to the United States, did they have much of an opportunity to meet others who had experienced that?
It's funny, it was like a cousins club. My parents, when they applied to come to the United States, actually my parents had wanted to come to Israel. And my father was very gung-ho to come to Israel. And think about it, this was 1947, 48. My mother was too afraid. She knew what was going on here in Israel and fighting for the land and opportunity. And she was just scared. So she figured my parents decided to come to America. And in the United States, every state had a quota of how many survivors they would have in the different states. And my parents were just placed in Richmond, Virginia, and that's where I grew up until I left and went to school in New York. But in regard to your question, there were some other survivors, and they were our family. You know, they sort of adopted each other. And I'll just tell you a funny story how, if you have time, in Richmond, Virginia, it's a small, city, and how many people can be there, and how many survivors could be there. But at the time, my parents came to America with $20, and my mother was at a place where they had secondhand furniture, secondhand dishes, refrigerator, all these things, and she would go to it was actually if something was damaged, the refrigerator might have a dent in it. They didn't have money to go to a store and get anything new, so she regularly went to this place every week to see what she could find. And someone that she was in the Holocaust with was there at the same place. Someone who she went through one of the camps was there in Richmond, Virginia. Now, what are the chances of this? And this man's name was Nathan Mizels. He comes home telling his wife, I saw Bella Schulman. Schulman was my mother's maiden name because he didn't know her when she was married. And his wife Miriam says, you're crazy. Richmond, Virginia, Bella Schulman, and she remembered my mother also. And he says, I'm telling you, it was Bella Schulman. She says, you're crazy. At any rate, she went back the next week. He says, let's talk to her. I said, no, I'm like, maybe it's not her. So he was too embarrassed to go up to my mother and say, are you Bella Schulman? So she was looking at some dishes on a table, and he decided to sing a song with her name in it. He says, a Bella Schulman, a Bella Schulman. And she looks at, he looks at her, and it was like finding a lost brother and sister. And they became best friends, of course, after that.
The video that we just saw of Faith Terezin, when the girl interviewed one of the kids who worked on the newspaper that they did,
Right, that was
couldn't answer her question. Not Ivan, it was Mishta who survived. The other one didn't. He couldn't answer her questions. He said it was just too many things happened. He couldn't answer. So thank your parents for doing it to you and for you passing it on
No,
to
and
us.
you know what? It was not easy for them. It was they were the happiest people in the world because they had family, but they were in pain. They were in so much pain from the experiences they had, and but they were always giving it themselves. My mom would cook food for people who weren't well. She would just do anything for people. She was always giving of herself, and my father also, and that's what they passed down to us. And instead of a bitterness, I remember when I spoke at AIS a few years ago, someone raised a hand and said, were your parents bitter people? And that word never even entered my vocabulary. I never even thought of it. They were so giving, so loving to everyone. Someone that they meet on the street, and they're just friendly. And I remember somebody asked my mother, and I think I'm very much like my parents, but someone who asked my mother, what's Minnie like? That's me. What's Minnie like? And so she says, I'm the only person she knows that could go into a public bathroom not knowing anyone and come out with a friend, And that was my parents. That was them. I can't take credit for the way I am. It's totally my upbringing and what my parents passed on to me. Any questions, guys? Don't be shy. I'm better now. So, okay.
Your mother managed to keep anything?
Pardon me?
Did your mother manage to keep anything?
Nothing. She was only 12 years old. Not pictures and nothing. As a matter of fact, my father has, if anybody ever wants to see my dad's DVD, you're more than welcome to. survivors. And my father was interviewed. So if anybody ever wants to see his DVD, it's 2 hours, so you gotta be patient. I don't know if you want to see it, but it's special. And at the time, my mother was alive. My mother unfortunately passed away 27 years ago. They weren't doing the DVDs, and like I said, she was very young, and she just had herself to deal with, you know, and try to fend for herself. Yeah.
How old did you say your father was?
My father was 19 when you just turned 19, and my mother was 12. She liked older men.
One of the things that they're doing, as you know, for the upcoming Rooney Bar is to make butterflies.
Right.
And I want to thank you because this whole time I'm thinking of the butterflies as representing children who were lost. And your story made me think that those butterflies actually are representing those children who lived.
And you know what? We made them in the preschool too, and it really brought very, very, very special meaning. And it was hard making them with these little ones. No one could do more and more and more, but we did 30, so that was pretty good for us. It really had a lot of meaning to me too.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
If any of us ever have additional questions or thoughts, can we come visit you?
Absolutely. I'll give you my phone number, my email. You can come see me in the preschool with the greatest of pleasure. Any of you, you know, really, I'm here because I want to be here, even though it was difficult. I got to say honestly, it was very difficult. But I knew I had to do this. And 6 years ago, thanks to Diane, she had me speak to a full auditorium full of people at AIS. And originally I said, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, only because of the emotions involved. And I told my kids about it, and they said, Ema, you gotta do this. You gotta do this. And I did it. I did it one other time, and this is the third time that I'm doing it. And I walk away on a high because I hope by what I've shared with all of you, that maybe one little story that I've shared with you, you'll share with someone else. And that way, these people will be remembered. Seriously, I'm at the preschool. Anybody, you know, want to speak to me about anything? I'm friendly. You know, you can come and see that. Please don't hesitate. And just remind me that, because there's so many of you, I don't know if I'll remember your faces, but I'll just say that, you know, you heard me speak today, and I'm more than happy to share anything with you.
Thank you very much.